The hall is loud with wine, grease, and laughter, and then it goes quiet. An old bow has just changed hands. It is not polished show. It is heavy and stubborn, a weapon for a man who knew both patience and force. On the floor lie 12 axe heads set in a line. On the floor lie 12 axe heads acting at courtship. Around them stand young nobles who have spent years eating another man's cattle and calling it courtship. At the edge of the room, a stranger in rags, as if greeting something alive. In that touch, the whole story of Odysseus gathers itself. To understand why this moment matters, we have to step back from the hall in Ithaca to the wreckage left by Troy. Greek memory called the return from war nostos, the hard road home, and no homecoming. That tradition became more famous than this one. The man at the center of it was not the strongest Greek warrior, nor the noblest, nor the most beloved. Odysseus was valued for another gift. He could read danger before others saw it. He could wait. He could lie well, plan well, and endure alliances. That was not a small talent. It was a form of small talent. The poem, later known as the Odyssey, presents him as a ruler of a small island kingdom on the western edge of the Greek world. Ithaca is no empire. Its wealth is counted in flocks, servants, ships, and land that can barely sustain them all. That matters. When a great king falls in a small house, the damage is intimate. Nettled Minkambing hill and towering trees, the curious boy named Storu loose discipline, worried servants, and neighbors who begin to measure how much can be taken. By the time Odysseus is ready to touch his own bow again, his absence has hollowed the house from within. In the epic tradition, the road home was never simple. Troy had fallen, but victory did not end the danger. The men who sacked cities still had to cross seas they did not control. They sailed in stitched hulls over waters that could turn black in an hour. Their world had no charts it ahead, no coast guard, no rescue. Every headland carried rumor. Every island might offer grain or slaves or a grave. The Greeks saw the sea not as empty river but as bedwed goodwill and divine forts. They wered good child, accident, divine force, storm fortune. Yes, but also could be skill, but it could also be favor. A voyage gives always practical and sacred at once. The Odyssey is not a careless boat of Odysseus. The reason is not a careless boast after Troy, but the blinding of Polyphemus, the Cyclops, who was said to be Poseidon's son. Odysseus saved himself and his men by trickery, yet in escaping he could not resist naming himself. That moment is one of the poem's clearest moral wounds. Cunning exposed him. In heroic culture, a name carried honor. To hide it could feel shameful, but to proclaim it too soon could be fatal. Odysseus wanted exactly whom known, and so the sea god learned T-Scott bait whined that byron quality that makes Odysseus remarkable also puts him at risk. Bold, he is disciplined, but not always silent. But he still wants witness. The poem admires him and judges him at the same time. That is one reason it has lasted. It does not give us a spotless hero. It gives us a man sharp enough to survive and human enough to make survival costly. By the time the final stretch of his journey begins, many of the great disasters are already behind him. He has seen strange coasts, lost comrades, and spent years trapped far from home. He has heard prophecies and watched men ignore them. The world around him has narrowed. He is no longer moving with a fleet, or even with confidence. He is moving with knowledge, bought in pain. The Eutychicos. He knows that some dangers cannot be fought head-on. Some can only be endured, outwitted, or escaped with part of the ship left intact. That is the man now standing in disguise at his own threshold. The bow in his hands is not just a weapon. It is a measure. Who can command it? Who still belongs in this house? But before the string sings in Ithaca, Odysseus must pass 2 trials at sea that show his greatness and his cost more clearly than almost any battle. The song that tempts men to forget home, and the strait where survival itself demands a choice no leader wants to make. Chapter 2. The warning comes from Circe, and in the Odyssey that matters. She is dangerous, but she is not foolish. She knows the Psi-head, Kos to soul to courage is enough. Odysseus is told first about the sirens, and the poem gives them a strange kind of power. They do not attack with claws or storms. They sit and sing. Their danger is not force but desire. They promise knowledge spent and release from struggle. For sailors who have spent years under strain, that promise can be deadlier than steel. It is easy now to hear the sirens as fantasy alone, but the story rises from real conditions of seafaring. Ancient coasts were lined with reefs, sudden winds, and places where a ship's crew could mistake calm for fear. Men rode for hours under heat, salt, and safety. Their minds were as exposed as their skin. Stories of voices from the shore, or of a coast that drew men to the shore, or of a coast that drew men to destruction, belong to that world. Tide, dangers, or taver the will. It asks a sharp question. The Odyssey turns such dangered. What is it that makes a tired man abandon the life he claims to love? The sirens do not merely offer pleasure. In Homer, they offer understanding. They know the grief of the earth. That is important. Odysseus is not only a man of appetite. He is a man who wants to know. He asks questions. He studies people. He takes risks for insight. He does not simply protect himself in the ordinary way. He orders his crew to stop their ears with wax. He orders his crew to stop their ears in the epics, but he has himself bound upright to the mast, that he can hear and yet not obey. This is one of the most revealing scenes in the epic, because is some niece among rolling hills and Aia's self. He knows that once desire enters through the ear, Odysseus' command may collapse. So he prepares against his own weakness in advance. That is not the behavior of a reckless man. It is the behavior of one who has learned that mastery sometimes means building restraints before temptation arrives. Kingship in the old Mediterranean world was not merely public authority. It was the rule of the self under pressure. It was the rule his own ship like a prisoner. Odysseus governs by surrendering freedom for a moment so that he can keep the larger freedom of return. The crew rows on. The island seems quiet. Then the voices begin. Homer does not dwell on melody. He dwells on effect. Odysseus strains. Protect. Strains. Orders. Begs. And rages. The men, protected by wax and instructed beforehand, row harder and lash him tighter. It is a brutal image if we slow down enough to see it. The captain is pleading. The crew refuses. Obedience in that moment means disobeying the man's present words in order to honor his earlier judgment. The whole ship survives because the men trust the better part of their leader over the louder part. There is also a deeper social truth here. In heroic stories, fame often comes through extraordinary individuals. But survival is usually collective. Odysseus may be the one remembered. Yet he does not pass the sirens alone. Sailors who hold the course, and men willing on rowers, and men willing to endure the captain's fury for his own good. The poem understands hierarchy, but it also understands interdependence. Even the cleverest king cannot row his own ship past every danger. Once the voices fade, the relief is brief. That is another mark of the Odyssey's realism. Sea travel allows almost no permanent rest. One peril opens directly onto another. What waits beyond them threatens the body. The next passage is not about the body. The crew and the very shape of moral leadership. The next passage is not about hearing too much, it is about knowing too much. Circe has already told Odysseus what lies ahead. On one side Charybdis, the swallowing whirlpool. On the other Scylla, the rock-dwelling devourer, who will snatch decisions bit'll escape. The old poems are full of monsters, but their staying power often comes from the human decisions built around them. The sirens ask whether home is still worth wanting. The next strait asks something harder. If every path leads to loss, what kind of man chooses which loss to bear? Waters narrow. That is the point at which myth and seamanship almost become the same thing. Ancient kills error. Ancient sailors feared straits because straits compress error. Jyoti punishes delay, bad timing, and panic. The Odyssey turns that fear into two powers facing each other across a channel. The Odyssey turns that fear that gulps down the sea in a Spitzy channel. Charybdis is less a creature above the waterlines, undoubted, more personal, initiate down, where Benti Joses defend themselves. One danger is total destruction, the other is partial but certain loss. To Circe that advice sounds monstrous until we understand the logic. Charybdis may take the whole ship. Scylla will take only 6 men. Here the poem abandons the comfort of heroic combat. Odysseus cannot win. He cannot kill his way through it. He can only calculate. Modern readers sometimes resist this moment because it strips glory from command. Yet that is exactly what makes what makes it powerful. Leadership in crisis is not always the art can still be saved. Sometimes does them burden soden. In Kitoritan, he warns them to row, keeps them from freezing in fear. Odysseus and steers into the passage, carrying knowledge he cannot share without breaking the crew before the danger even strikes. There is a moral discomfort in that silence, and the poem does not remove it. It lets us feel the loneliness of the captain who sees what others do not, and also the injustice felt by those who suffer without consent. 6 men will die almost as a payment made in secret. Then Scylla strikes. Homer gives us one of the harshest images in the epic. Men lifted from the ship like fish taken from the sea, crying out to their captain as they vanish. It is quick, almost too quick, which is often how catastrophe is remembered. Odysseus later says it was the most pitiful thing his eyes had seen on all his wandering. Not the roar of armies, not collapsing cities. This, men he knew by name, taken while the ship could do nothing but move on. There is an older Mediterranean truth inside that image. Life at sea trained people to accept forms of grief, without burial, without recovery, without ceremony. A body lost to water often remained lost. The dead could not be laid out, washed, mourned in the proper way, or placed beneath a marker. That mattered deeply in ancient cultures. Burial was not only respect, it was belonging. To be denied does not merely kill 6 sailors. She robs them of the kind of ending their world considered honorable. Odysseus' curse carries that stain onward. The poem's emotional nope. It survives, but survival does not feel Allah told. The ship survives. Odysseus has done what reason demanded. This is not a story in which wisdom removes pain. Wisdom can reduce ruin. It cannot make ruin clean. For a man known for plans and intelligence, that is one of the hardest lessons of all. The crew comes through the strait damaged in body and trust. Fear does not disappear once the danger is behind them. It changes form. Men who have been spared begin to think their captain sees too far, keeps too much, asks too much obedience for too little comfort. That matters Because the next disaster in the Odyssey grows not from a monster waiting out the ship, grows not from a monster disobedience inside it, but from hunger deed. And the crew reaches the island of the sun, Threen Achams. The crew reaches, cattle graze. The warning is clear, do not touch them. In epic terms, this is a test of restraint. In human terms, it is also a test almost designed to fail. Storms pin the men down. Odysseus sleeps. The crew, exhausted and half hopeless, kills what should not be killed. In a subsistence world, hunger is never abstract, but neither is sacrilege. The poem joins the two. Men destroy the boundary because they no longer believe enough good remains to be protected by it. From that Tikid, the last collapse becomes inevitable. Zeus shatters the ship. The companions die. The sea that once carried a king. And Kajman clinging to wreckage. All the names, jokes, oars, orders, and shared meals of the voyage are gone. The return has been narrowed from expedition to endurance, from leadership to loneliness. Home after such loss, home itself may no longer know him. Chapter 4. Odysseus does not step ashore in triumph. He reaches Ithaca stripped down to almost nothing. Home. In the poem, this return is delayed even after arrival because the danger is no longer storm or monster. Home has become a player his own name could kill him before it stores him. That reversal is one of the greatest ironies in the whole tradition. Home. Athena, years of fighting to get back. The first task on home soil is concealment. Athena oversees this stage, and in Homeric thought that makes sense. If Poseidon represents force, depth, and uncontrollable reach, Athena stands for judge and unjudgment, craft and timing. Odysseus is her kind of man not because he is perfect, but because he survives by using the mind under pressure. When she meets him in Ithaca, she does not tell him to announce himself. She tells him to watch. This is not only divine stratitude. It reflects an old political truth. A king returning after decades cannot assume the house is waiting unchanged. Powered Odysseus comes back to is built around the household and appetite. The world Odysseus comes back's a private household, the oikos, the central unit of wealth and identity in Greek society. A king cow is not just of authority. House. It is storehouse, seat of private residence, workplace, ritual center, and public symbol. To invade it is to attack rule itself. The suitors who crowd Odysseus's hall are not harmless romantics. They are aristocratic consumers of another man's estate, each trying to turn Penelope's marriage into political transfer. By eating his flocks and draining his jars with their teeth before Odysseus enters that world, he stops with the swineherd Eumaeus. This matters because the epic repeatedly honors loyalty outside the polished circle of noble birth. Eumaeus is a servant, but he keeps the house alive in the only way still open to him. Work. The poem gives him dignity to a master presumed dead. He knows suffering. He has him dignity without the Pella mentality, has his own life story of displacement and sale into servitude. Yet, he embodies the ethic that the palace has lost. Hospitality without calculation here is one of the story's strongest moral measures. In the Greek world, travel was dangerous, and strangers mattered. A guest might be helpless, but he might also be protected by Zeus himself. To receive a traveler with food, shelter, and questions in the proper order was not mere politeness. The suitors fail this test constantly. Eumaeus passes it with almost no resources. That contrasts us what kind of rot has entered Ithaca. Wealth without orders, what kind of rot has Heraclite without shame? Then comes one of the quietest and most devastating recognitions in ancient, the dog Argos. Once an great college, he now lies neglected on a dung heap, old and full paracilla restinda. He cannot rise to greet his master. He can only lift his head and recognize him before dying. The scene is brief, but its force is immense. The dog marks time more clearly than any speech. 20 years are suddenly visible in fur, weakness, and decay. Even an animal has kept a truer memory than the men inside the house. Odysseus weeps, but only inwardly. It is discipline under concealment. All through this phase of the story, emotion the hour tod, the Sot's open feeling would expose him before the hour is right. Telemachus, his son, becomes the next and greatest test. Odysseus left when the boy was an infant, not yet fully formed, but no longer a child. The son has grown under-rumored, he tuli padur, and the daily sight of strangers consuming his inheritance. In such a world, manhood is not simply age, it is the ability to bear silence, to plan. When father and son finally meet in private, the reunion is not sentimental, it is strategic before it is affectionate. That too fits the world of the poem. Love, in a threatened household, must quickly become alliance. They count enemies. They consider doors, weapons, and timing. Telemachus must learn in a single stretch of conversation what the last 20 years have made of his father. Odysseus must learn whether the house still contains one man. What he finds is not perfection, artitspulit. Pot eins is not pretension, but courage. And courage. Courage here does not mean a shout or a charge. It means the ability to endure humiliation in silence while a plan ripens. That is much harder than many battlefield acts. The road from the shore to the hall is only a few steps distant. In moral weight, it is enormous. Chapter 5, The Palace of Ithaca, is not merely occupied. Every day the suitors slaughter more livestock and treat delay as their right. But Penelope's long demands and resistance has become famous. But in the poem it is not based on abstract faith alone. It is built from intelligence, social skill, and time-buying devices, and give-paid time-buying devices. She is trapped in a structure that gives men public leverage, by which she works by day and undoes to be is not simply a clever anecdote. It is political survival carried out with thread. To understand Penelope properly, we have to see the pressure around her. In the ancient household, a queen without a present king stood in a dangerous place. She was central to legitimacy and vulnerable because of it. If she remarried, the estate and public authority could shift. If she refused forever, disorder could deepen into violence. The suitors use both custom and intimidation. They speak as if they are asking demarabilwage, but their behavior is already coercive. They do not wait outside the house in honorable restraint. They install themselves inside it. Telemachus, Torquil, sees this clearly, the Deutin Peniltilge Plin Anoit. He is the lawful heir, but law needs Panacote, amicus be. Young men in aristocratic cultures had to prove themselves in speech and action before their claim could hold. The suitors mock him precisely because they sense the gap between title and power. He has lineage, but not yet command. That is why Odysseus return his wife, but restore the structure by which son, servants be made Waltual, son, servants, land and altar all belong together. The house must made one again, or it will not survive. Int is one, toward, of the most psychologically rich sections of the Odyssey. The great traveler comes home and becomes an observer. In the place where he should need no mask, he hears what people say, bud, tur, uldod, pul, dodge, nothing, and which drift toward whoever seems likely to win. He sees which servant speaks. He learns that disorder is not abstract. It lives in habit, a mocking word, a man leaning too easily into another man's wealth, His conversations with Penelope are especially remarkable because they move on several levels at once. She speaks to him as to a stranger's that suggests she never fully stops testing the world. She asks about her husband. He answers with a mixture of truth and fiction, the art in which he is unsurpassed, in which he is unsurpassed. Some readers see cruelty in this delay. Why not reveal himself? But the poem insists that recognition in a damaged house cannot be granted cheaply. Penelope has lived among deception for years. Istinin pertinatus. Identity must be proved through marks that false men cannot means. The old nurse Euryclea comes closer to the beggar's feet and wash the scar on his leg, a wound from a boar hunt in his youth. That scar is one of the poem's strongest signs because it carries the whole world of aristocratic upbringing, hunting in the hills, male kinship, danger, and initiation into status. Bodies remember what speech can hide. Yet, even after she knows him, silence is demanded. The house is so compromised that knowledge itself becomes dangerous unless timed. Meanwhile, Penelope reaches the end of test. This choice is not random. A spear is delay. Her husband's bow becomes a spear is not. It is linked to the strength, training, and identity of one man. Touches, preta his measure. To string it is to enter his. To send an arrow clean through the axe heads is not just a sport. It is a declaration that the absent master has truly been matched or replaced. The suitors take the challenge as another game because long impunity has made them foolish. They mistake patience for weakness. They mistake understrain for a household already theirs, and yet not all uncertainty belongs to them. Penelope herself remains one of the poem's most carefully drawn minds. Is she only creating a test no suitor can pass? Does she suspect more than she says? The epic leaves room for debate or magical intuition. She acts with reserve to simple ignorance. Dignity. She acts with reduced to simple ignorance or magical intuition. She acts with resiepovide. Guarded thought is partheads. Is upon pa. Apa. Isa. So the stage is set. A bow few can bend, weapons quietly removed, a son who must control his impulses, loyal servants waiting for a signal, and a king still dressed as the lowest man in the room. The return home is nearing its public moment. But first, the house must expose itself completely. Every insult must finish revealing what kind of men the suitors truly are. Chapter 6. When the contest begins, the atmosphere in the hall changes from indulgence to strain. Until now, the suitors have assumed that time belongs to them. Penelope has attached her future to an action. Now time has sharpened. The action requires real strength. One, ills, and against it, fail. The scene is almost comic on the surface. They warm it, but beneath the comedy lies a judgment on their character. These men have consumed a warrior's estate for years while lacking the discipline even to master his weapon. The bow itself carries older layers of Greek life. Archery and heroic poetry stand slightly apart from the close combat honor of spear and sword. It suggests distance, precision, and deadly control. Odysseus is not the charging berserker type. His signature weapon fits his nature. It kills from thought as conscious. It kills from thought as much as force. The suitors, by contrast, they feast together, posture together, and fail together. The contest silently reveals that the household has been under the pressure betons demen all along. The beggar apanabri di dolo. The beggar then asks for a turn. This request is offensive to the suitors because hierarchy matters in their world. A ragged stranger touching the king's bow feels to them like pollution. But the request also exposes their insecurity. If the beggar is ridiculous, why fear the attempt? Their anger shows how brittle their authority really is. Penelope is willing to allow it. Telemachus manages the room more firmly than before. The old order, though hidden, is already beginning to reassemble. Odysseus takes the bow with ease, and Odysseus tightens the bow with ease, 'cause it turns force into fluency. Bitus, tus, the bow, od, loaded. There is no ugly struggle. The bow knows him. In that instant, recognition moves through the hall before most men understand it. Skill, after all, has its own voice. The arrow flies through the axe heads cleanly. The impossible has been done, not by a suitor rising into greatness, but by the man whose place they stole. Then the disguise falls away in word, if not yet in clothing. Odysseus names himself. He stands in his own hall, with his own bow, and announces judgment. The first arrow kills Antinous, the most violent of the suitors. At chivalric combat, it is sudden punishment. Some later readers have found the bloodshed excessive, but within the moral world of the epic, it is presented as the abused just Eusportentoidund. You'd abused of a polluted house, plotted Telemachus's murder, used, devoured another man's livelihood, and dishonored the basic laws that bind guest, host, and kin. Still is chaotic, savage, and frightening. The suitors scramble for shields and spears, only to discover, too late, most of the weapons are gone. Telemachus and the loyal servants close the exits. Arrows fall. Men beg, offer repayment. Odysseus refuses. That refusal tells us the offense is beyond accountancy. Certain violations cannot be settled by returning more cattle or more gold. Once the house itself has been desecrated and the heir marked for death, restoration requires more order. There is a severe ancient logic at order. One among rolling hills at work here, one tied to honor, culture, and household, and a palace was not just a building. It was a moral field. To eat there under protection and then exploit the protection was to invert the entire code by which elite society held together. The slaughter is the poem's way of making the inversion visible and final. To modern ears, it can found absolute. Moments ambiguity in foundational acts. Moments when ambiguity collapses and a line is drawn in blood because softer lines have already failed. Even so, the Odyssey does not celebrate violence in a mindless way. It's shown so. Odysseus is relentless in a mindless. It shows strain. Odysseus is relentless, but he is also a man. Damocynticus proves himself not by pressure, but by standylines, taught by a speech. Servants traveling in the storm beside his father. Servants reveal themselves under pressure. Cowardice and fidelity sort themselves quickly when death is close. The house becomes a courtroom with no appeal. When it is over, the hall is full of bodies and broken furniture, and the old life cannot simply resume because rightful man is standing there again. Penelope still has one order, and Compli is truly another. Penelope still has to know whether this man is truly hers. Ithaca still has to absorb the deaths of noble sons. Odysseus has reclaimed his place. The deepest recognition of all waits in a room not made for public display, in the quiet knowledge of a bed no impostor could understand. Chapter still has suitor overshadows what follows, yet the emotional center of the turn lies elsewhere. Penelope does not run at once into Odysseus's arms. She does not collapse into easy certainty. After 20 years, after rumors, lies, disguises, and is intelligence shaped of this day. Caution, shaped by survival. Iwais, delaying, grants her that dignity. Protect could she abandon those habits at the very moment when a false step could still destroy her. This restraint has sometimes troubled audiences. though audiences who want the reunion to release tension immediately. But the poem is wiser than that. Long absence changes people. War changes them. Grief changes them. De betold, to dilis, a man can return in guarding her heart against Tunsis, because hope itself became dange. Oliver. Penelope. If she gave herself to every report, every traveler's tale, every rumor of a ship on the horizon, she would go mad. So she built a hard inner chamber and stayed alive within it. Her test is simple and devastating. She orders that Odysseus's bed be moved from the marriage chamber. To anyone else in the room, this might sound like a practical instruction. To Odysseus, it is impossible. He built that bed around a living olive tree rooted in the boat. The room shaped around it. One can't form the bedpost. The room was shaped around it, in that protest with the force of a man struck at the center of himself. In protest, cat ped is immediate, pul Penelope hibas, she needs. The symbol is almost too perfect, east what she, yet it earns its power because it grows from the world of the poem. The olive tree mattered in Greek life as a sign of endurance, usefulness. To root a marriage bed in living wood is to join intimacy with place, craft, and permanence. Their union was not an ornament laid into a palace. It was built from the ground of the home itself. That is what years of disorder could not erase. Servants could be turned, halls polluted, livestock consumed, names doubted. But the secret of the bed remained beneath the noise. When Penelope accepts him, the reunion is not merely romantic. Husband and wife together reform the center of the household. In ancient terms, that means alphabet lawfuled, contui returns, might, eti curious boy, and alfari, disi. The line between public and private was never sharp in such a house. Marriage, servants, sacrifice, land, and reputation all met in one domestic space. So the recognition beside the rooted bed is also the restoration of the house as a moral unit. Yet the Odyssey does not let us forget the cost. His crew is gone. Many in Ithaca, sons, brothers, or allies killed in the hall. Many in Ithaca now mourn sons, even within the family. Years cannot be handed back. Telemachus, the Palmely, Hadud's childhood, harder. Penelope's middle years been consumed by waiting. Odysseus himself returns, older, harder. Homecoming in pod, nilded. Tild alta Curzine al to Troy. But it is not innocence recovered. It is belonging recovered after innocence is gone. There is also a final reckoning with the gods. In Homer, Athena brings the story toward peace, restraining revenge from spreading endlessly through the island. That matters because vendetta can outlive justice if left alone. One blood debit calls for another. The epic, therefore, closes not in permanent emotional sweetness, by divine and human restraint together. Order returns, denig. Order returns because violence stops somewhere. A house may be cleansed only if the wider community does not keep bleeding. For Odysseus dominate everything. The Odyssey remonsters and divine interventions. Odysseus cannot dominate everything. He cannot beat the sea into obedience. Odysseus unmakeendate dipet or force recognition before it is earned. He can return, prove himself, and accept that survival has changed the shape of what he comes back to. This is why the story has never been just an adventure tale. It is about the long cost of getting home and the even harder work of being fit for home when at last one arrives. And this returns us to the bow with which we began. The bow matters because it marks the private truth beneath public victory. The bed matters because it marks the private truth beneath public victory. Without the first, Odysseus would die unknown inside, in his own hall. Without the second, he would remain only a successful avenger. The epic requires Chapter 8. When later generations looked back on Odysseus, they often remembered one trait above all others: cunning. The Greek word behind that reputation carries ideas of turning, weaving, adaptation, and many-sided intelligence. It is not simple honesty, and the poem never pretends that it is. Odysseus lies, disguises himself, tests loyal people harshly, and sometimes speaks when silence would pain. 8. Odyssey does not ask whether cunning is good in the abstract. Yet the Odyssey doesn't want the hard work of preserving a life. A household gives the Tory conscience. That question gives the story much of its maturity. In some traditions, the great hero is the man who overwhelms obstacles with force. Odysseus is different. Through does not break. He bends, so he does not break. Odysseus he waits, he endures humiliation. He learns from women as well as men, from servants as well as kings, from islands, storms, and mistakes. This does not make him morally pure. It makes him unusually complete as a portrait of intelligence under pressure. The world he moves through is unstable, and his greatness lies stability cannot be demanded into being. Historically, the Odyssey preserves a mixed world. Some details seem to remember the old Mycenaean distance war, others the later age in which the poem took shape. Others fit the later age which the poem qualities, guest friendships, and shifting power defined daily life. If the part layered, it is one reason the poem feels so alive. It carries memory and present experience together. It is one the narrated, not immortal. Odysseus belongs to a heroic past, yet his problem years, strained marriage, uncertain children, exhausted authority, the difficulty of trust after long deception. The gods, too, can be read on more than one level. In the story, they are active beings with rival favor and anger, but they also express truths about the world the Greeks inhabited. He is the sea as clearns at the edge of what nature will plans, the reminder that skill ends at the edge of what nature will allow. Athena is not merely a helpful goddess. She is to doing force is enough. Hermes, Weres, Ceres, days, aid, the passage. The gift of he appears carries the quickness of passage. The poem's divine drama makes visible the pressures already built into human life. For modern listeners, perhaps the strongest reason the Odyssey endures is that it refuses simple victory. Odysseus gets home, yes, but not by remaining untouched. Home itself does not wait like a painted image preserved under glass. It decays, resists, and tests him. The people he loves are not suspended in his absence. They adapt as best they can. In that sense, every age of war and migration, return, is not the reverse of departure. The man who comes back is altered, and the place receiving him is altered too. That is why the final scene him is altered too. A son learning to stand matters so deeply. A scar, rolling hills and towering head. He lived beside a father he barely knows. A wife naming a bed that cannot be moved because its heart is still rooted in the ground. These are not grand tilt signs, and they carry the whole moral weight of the journey. The poem suggests that after all the noise of fame, the true test of a man may lie in whether he can still be recognized where recognition matters most. There is no need to make Odysseus simpler than he is. He is brave and proud, loyal and ruthless by turns. That complexity he causes suffering and suffers to smooth out. It is the reason is not something the epic fails centuries. He does not belong only to the age of bronze weapons across centuries. He does belong only to the age bronze weapons and oared ships. He belongs to waybining absence. dangerous travel, this wounded leadership, and the difficult art of coming back without losing the self entirely. So the old bow is strung, the hall is cleared, the rooted bed is named, and the island breathes again under restored order. Yet beneath the ending remains the sea, vast and unconquered, and carried stories from coast to coast until singers gave them form. Odyssey stays is home, but the memory of water does not vanish. It stays in the poem as a permanent measure of human smallness and human persistence, and perhaps that is the lasting power of this homecoming. Not that one man outsmarted monsters or punished in quaint Odyssey, nestled among rolling tempt his seat, rent, temptation, wreck, disguise, and blood. The story still believes a life can be gathered back to its center, not made pure, gathered back. In a world where so much can be lost beyond recall, that is a hope stern enough to deserve the name wisdom. Chapter 9, if we listen carefully to the Odyssey's final movement, we hear not celebration alone but a quieter tone beneath it, almost like the settling of a house after long disturbance. Fires burn again under rightful order. Speech does not need its salt. Bread can be eaten to hide his face. Yet the poem never invites us to forget the road that led here. Ithaca has been regained, but it has been regained through patience. That arid Iliad bordered on pain, arid justice that bordered on terror. The calm at the end is valuable precisely because it was not easy. In that sense, Odysseus's return is one of the ancient world's clearest meditations, the bond between defined only by inner and place. A man in Homer is not defined only by inner feeling. He is defined by household, lineage, memory, rightly before others. To be cut off from home is therefore not just loneliness. It is a threat to personhood itself. Odysseus survives many dangers. Odysseus always to itself. Odysseus survives many dangers, but the deepest danger no longer belongs anywhere, that he may become a wandering intelligence with no hearth to anchor it. Belonging is restored, not keen through signs. Led the curious not by sentiment, but by recognition through signs. The scar proves continuity of body. The bow proves continuity of skill and rank. The bed proves continuity of marriage and shared knowledge. Each sign reaches a different circle of relationship. In this way, the epic builds identity outward from the most intimate to the most public. A man says who he is. The world around him answers whether that claim can stand. Odysseus passes that test not because he tells the best story, though he often does, but because the marks of a lived life align around him. There is also a lesson here about memory. The Odyssey grew out of oral tradition, out of repeated performance, variation, and communal listening. Its hero is a man who must keep his own story alive, while others tell false versions of it in his absence. That makes him a fitting figure for a poem carried by memory across generations. He returns by holding on to names, roots, vows, and signs. The audience, too, returns to him by holding on to the poem. In both cases, forgetting is the enemy. To forget home is to drift. To forget the sculptures thought about exile and return. For all that, the Odyssey does not end by claiming that cleverness alone rules the world. If it did, Odysseus would have kept his crew human skill. Odysseus would have kept his crew avoided every disaster. Instead, the poem teaches a harder balance. Human skill matters, so does restraint. So does piety, though Homer's piety is practical, woven into life rather than preach it from abstraction. Men do not own outcomes. Latters, they navigate within limits by how they meet those limits, how they bear loss, and whether they still know what is worth reaching after when the world tries to seduce, batter, or empty them. That is why the sirens still matter. So does the Strait of Scylla and Charybdis. So does the beggar at the gate. Each scene tests a different kind of fidelity. Fidelity to home against sweet forgetting. Fidelity to survival under impossible choices. Fidelity to truth while moving through dystich. The Belites' answer is not rigid simplistic. Odysseus wins by yielding at times, by hiding at times. Constancy in this story is not rigid sameness. It is the refusal to let the center be Oldtree, even when the route back to that center bends through deception and grief. They now deku it. When the tale closes, Athena stands near, but not as a crutch for a helpless man. Her presence confirms something the poem has shown all along. Wisdom walks closest to those who can act, suffer, and learn. Odysseus has not been the most obedient worshipper. He has been something more interesting to the tradition that shaped him. He has been a mortal whose mind remains active the whole sea. That is why he is worth following, blood in the hall or the foam around broken timbers. So the last image in a chamber built around living wood. A rooted bed in a chamber built around living warmth, and it be something steady as at image gathers, tearing epic the ground sign. That inch can delay a man, war can age him. Storms can delay a man. War can age him. Desire can distract him. Gods can wound him. Strangers can consume his house. But if something true remains rooted deeply enough, return is still possible. And that is where this long journey finally comes to rest. Not in flawless triumph, but in hard-won recognition. Not in the erasing of what was suffered, but in the reclaiming of what suffering could not erase. Odysseus, at last, is not simply alive. He is known. He is home.